to the July 2026 IndiNations podcast. I'm Jeremy Bryan, and this is powered by IndiWealth. Today, we're going to talk. This is going to be a multi-part series, but we're going to start with the broad scopes here of minors' trusts. I think it's really worthwhile discussing this over an extended period of time, and we've put together a strategy guide for stewardship of minors' trusts going forward. Because I really think in Indian country, this is one of the most important things you can do to set yourself up for that 7 generations investing that is part of the overall landscape and part of the things we talk about here at IndiWealth. This really establishes what you want to do and what you want to accomplish for your youth going forward so that they can prosper further going in the future. So I really think it's important to have a discussion about this and try to set this up in the proper fashion. So you can see it, I call it aligning distribution, policy, and investment strategy. But it's really trying to take a step back in the minors' trust. When you set these up, what are you trying to accomplish by giving your minors a foot up in the world? Providing them financial resources that they can use. What do you hope they do? How do you want them to achieve it? And what are the steps you all can take so that you can put those things on the best foot forward for your minors going forward? So without any further ado, let's get started. So, as I said, I think this is more than just an account. It really establishes the financial structure for future generations. Again, providing that leg up so that they may prosper even more in the future. I think it's incredibly important. A governance and policy responsibility. Again, this is something you are setting up and you want to structure it in a fashion to achieve the outcomes you would hope to achieve. And so it really is, you need to have oversight and you need to have policy in place that allows you to create what you want to create for your constituents going forward. I think it's a tool for opportunity, stability, and stewardship. And when I say a tool for opportunity, I mean for not only for the minor that's receiving the benefit, but also for the community as a whole. Because a lot of times, if you set this up in the proper fashion, it can be used as a tool for community benefit more than even just individual benefit. But in my opinion, I think the outcomes depend heavily on how you design and structure this going forward. Giving people financial leg up is a great start, but if you don't set up the proper structure and you just give it to them, they're not established in a way that they could use it to really build themselves up going forward. A lot of times, in a lot of existing minors trusts, you may have had legacy issues where, the money was just at this age, it's given to you and here you go. They're not financially ready for those types of things. And so you can establish outcomes and you can establish design and structure that fit the outcomes you want to achieve for your constituent. So let's talk about the financial structures. I think they should reflect tribal priorities. And first and foremost, in most tribal institutions, is sovereignty and supporting self-determination. Again, self-determination for the minor themselves, but self-determination as the community too. This is, as a sovereign nation, you have designs and ideals for your constituent based on how they should, the best methods for them to prosper going forward. That is self-determination. These funds should be used to enhance that sovereignty profile going forward. Culture. Every individual culture, I know, there's several Indian nations out there and they're not all exactly the same. In fact, you've met one, you usually have met one. They all have different prospects, different culture, different components that they're doing to advance their people. And I think it should, the trust should be designed around the nation's values. What are the most important things to you all? And how can you set up the design and structure to achieve the outcomes that are aligned with your values? Stewardship absolutely should serve more than one generation. Again, from the people that are putting these together, usually a tribal council, an executive director, these kinds of things. When you're establishing this, you need to try to establish not only for the people that are going to benefit from this at the outset, but how do we recycle that benefit so that it enhances for future generations ahead? And lastly, in purpose. Connect the money to the intended outcomes. Really think about that. purpose before you set anything else. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the main things? It may be more than one, and that's absolutely fine. But you need to understand what that is, because then you can set the policy that aligns with those outcomes going forward. So just ask yourself, what are we trying to protect, support, and build? If the tribal council, I mean, that's what tribal councils are designed to do, is really kind of establish that for their communities, and really build up the fashion in the proper way to protect, support, and build and enhance their sovereignty. So as you're thinking about that, this fits within that too. How do we establish the miners trust to be under that umbrella of protecting, supporting, and building our people up to enhance our sovereignty going forward? So ask yourself simply, what is the trust meant to accomplish? And it can be one of these, it can be many of these. I think it should add an element of all of these. Stability being one, is that again, giving that foothold and allowing your miners as they grow up and as they go into adulthood, a baseline of support that provides some stability so they can achieve what they want to going forward. Remember, this is meant to design for specific outcomes, but at the end of the day, the biggest outcome is that your miner enhances their prosperity going forward and hopefully passes that on to future generations as well. Education. Do we want this aligned with enhancing the education of our people? Do we want this to be an education component as part of the process to getting them to being financially ready to use these assets in the proper fashion going forward? How do we want to align that? I think education is an absolutely essential part of that. Housing. Do we want to establish something where we have more permanent and we allow incentives for this, or this, the miners trust allows us to build these kind of components within there to be prosperous for people to have shelter going forward and have a nice place to call home, whether that's on reservation or off reservation? How do we align that? Is this what we want to do from a community's perspective? I think going to the left side, community, I think is, how do we establish community benefit that again is part of the individual benefit? How do we bring this back? How do we support our community during this time where we're giving this money in the hopes that it actually enhances us as a broad? Again, greater than the sum of the parts, the whole being the greater than the sum of the parts. That's, if you can establish that through some outcomes and design and structure, you can actually enhance your community benefit going forward. And I think the bottom two kind of align together: long-term wealth and opportunity. Really, long-term wealth allows you more opportunity going forward, right? If you think about history, think about the chances of, the leg up, right, from a legacy component and from people who have assets. They can take chances that frankly people that don't have those cannot, right? They can't afford the mistakes that people with longer term wealth can achieve. And their future going forward, that builds upon itself, is that you can allow people the opportunity to try to do what they want to do from their lives and enhance themselves and enhance their community over an extended period of time by building structures that add to long-term wealth. So I really think those two are aligned. They don't have to be. There's still opportunity that doesn't require long-term wealth. It's just those can act in conjunction and work really well together to enhance opportunities for the tribe as a whole. And I think distribution should follow purpose, right? Is that purpose shouldn't follow distributions, right? It's like, oh, I got a pile of money. Now what do I do with it? We should be aligning these structures of the miners trust to allow for, when those distributions, we already have a purpose in mind. And that purpose has been, again, it can be one of these, it can be many of these, but how do we align that so that once those distributions do start taking place, we've already got a pretty stable focus of what the purpose that we are intending to do. And we've got those outcomes set in, not in stone, but we've got those outcomes set so that we've set the bar up in the proper fashion so that when they use those distributions, they're using them in the fashion that we've seen as the best opportunity for them going forward. I think distribution strategy shapes real life outcomes. And this is All I did on this slide is basically plan versus no plan. And I think if you think about plan, I think a strong distribution strategy, and we'll talk about more specifics in distribution strategies in later videos, but really we're setting the stage here for this. And I think a strong distribution strategy can state it aligns with the purpose. Again, you've really established what you want to achieve with regard to setting these funds aside for your minors going forward. So we need to align the distributions with that purpose as well. I want timing and taxes to work together as a community. You really don't want to set somebody up aside and saying, hey, here's the money and here's a big tax burden that goes with it. By setting a proper distribution strategy, you actually can avoid a lot of that aggressive tax burden. Now, again, can you avoid taxes at all, the costs and everything? No, you can't. But what you can do is set it up in the proper fashion so that you can make that not such a burden as soon as the money comes whole and with somebody who may not be ready to handle that level of burden as of yet. Again, individual support with community benefits. You're providing this miners trust is providing support for your individual participants. I think that's great. I think it also should and hopefully support a strong distribution strategy that allows them to replenish the community benefit. Again, whole greater than the sum of the parts, bringing back, providing education so that they come back educated and able to help their community even further, providing them financial support to open businesses, which enhance the prosperity of the nation going forward as well. So I think there are a lot of avenues that a distribution strategy can support the individual, but also in the hopes that that comes back to the community as a whole. Now let's turn to the more negative side is that lack of planning. Again, I think the biggest one is that the money arrives before financial maturity. If you're not setting up an education structure that allows the recipient to understand what this money can do for them going forward, short-termism will take over. Short-termism and lack of education are destroyers of wealth over long periods of time. It just is what it is. So you need to be able to set up a structure that allows them to achieve some level of financial maturity. Do they need to be experts? Absolutely not. But they need a baseline of financial education and understanding to understand what this money can work for them going forward in the best fashion. Otherwise, giving an 18-year-old a big pile of money and saying good luck, a lot of times can lead to what I would call less than ideal outcomes. Avoidable tax burdens. Again, you could have avoided these tax burdens for beneficiaries by setting up the proper distribution strategy and the proper planning and the proper financial education. Again, you're not going to be able to avoid all tax. There's just no way around it. You have to pay some level of tax unless you set up the structure in a very different manner. But there are avoidable things so that the first thing that they have to deal with is a very large tax burden from a lump sum change that really reduces the overall benefit that they can see from the miners trust. Last one for here, and I think this is actually really important, is that lack of planning can lead to organizational risk and leadership friction. Again, you're probably going to have turnover. In the miners trust, this is going to be developed for generations. So you're going to have turnover in leadership during that period of time. And if you don't have a plan and a structure and a broad-based outcome that you want to see and a really strong distribution strategy that leads to those outcomes, you could have a constant changing force of what is happening there and really some friction with regard to the best ways and uses of this money. I think this is where tribal council needs to really understand, if you don't have a miners trust set up already, really setting up, again, that outcome-based distribution strategy so that you've really built it up around your nation's values. I think that's incredibly important because, again, down the road, you're building this for something that will likely outlive you and especially outlive your tenure on the council. So you really need to set up and think about that in the proper fashion. Otherwise, these organizational risks and frictions can really lead to negative outcomes going forward. So I think by planning, you're not going to be able to avoid all of it, but you can avoid a lot of that by setting that purpose up at the outset. I think distribution policy should drive your investment strategy. And again, not the other way around, is that you don't set up a strategy and then say, oh, based upon how we're invested, here's what we can distribute. No, we set up the investment strategy based upon how we want to distribute that money going forward. And again, I think here is where the time horizon model really works well, especially in this, is that, your time horizon to distribution. Again, you've set up the strategy for your outcomes, you set the incentives, you set up the necessities that need to be done to achieve your distribution and the things that, the recipient needs to do. And now you're on a time frame and saying, okay, I've got in the next 2 years, we have this much for distribution. Well, the investment strategy for that should be very different from the person who is maybe 1 year old or you're just born and being part of the miners trust going forward. They have 18 plus years and maybe even up to 25 years and maybe even more than that, depending on how you set up the distribution strategy. But they have a very long period of time. So that should be invested very differently than somebody who has very little time before they get their distribution, because you don't want to take the volatility risk, because that distribution is coming up in a short period of time. And you never know in the next 0 to 6 months, in the next 0 to 2 years, what the market's going to do. So you want to be careful of that. So when you have a shorter time frame, you want to be focusing on capital preservation, keeping those assets in place so that we don't lose a lot of money before the distribution happens. Low volatility, low risk, high liquidity. That's what you want to be looking at in the short term. In the long term, should be absolutely a growth-oriented allocation. You don't care about those little bumps in the markets for the whole period of time. Now, they can be painful. Everyone cares when the market's down 20%. Everyone cares. It doesn't matter how long your tenure is. But you can go through those because over longer periods of time, the market and stock market and alternative investments have been the best way to grow assets going forward. And so you can take that short-term volatility to your advantage because you have a long time frame to try to grow these assets over an extended period. So you should be doing things that are growth oriented. Again, a greater tolerance for market volatility and strategic liquidity. You don't need that money in the next 0 to 6 months, right? You can do some things that are very liquid, like the stock market, or you can do some things that are less liquid, like alternatives and private investing as well. So there are a lot of options when you have an extended time frame to try to diversify yourselves to grow that pie over a longer period of time. And then why I didn't talk about the middle is that middle frame tends to be where you have a more balanced approach, a little of the safety and a little of the growth blended together in the proper fashion based upon that time frame. At 10 years, you should probably still be focused very much towards long-term growth. As you get to 2 years, you should be focusing more and more towards safety components so that your volatility isn't quite as long, because you're starting to get to that area where that distribution is getting nearer and nearer to your time frame. And so by establishing this, you can do a balanced income and growth here during that period. Again, probably more on the growth side with the longer tenure, and focusing and shifting closer to safety as you get closer to that 2-year time frame. Greater stability, I think, as distributions near, I think that's very important. Again, you want to, especially when you get into short term, but as you're getting closer and closer, you just want to have less overall volatility in that portfolio. And you can absolutely set up this structure for the miners that are set up in different cohorts of age, really is how you would want to think about this. And so that is a way to establish the investment strategy to fit that distribution profile. And I think, again, it should be built around when the money is needed. And this is, in my opinion, the best way to do that. I think strong governance absolutely supports consistent outcomes. We talked about this before, is that a lack of planning can lead to that organizational risk and friction. I think as a tribal council and as an overall group, this isn't just the council, is that there's going to be many constituents involved here, but we should also all be focusing on strong governance to support the outcomes that we want to achieve. And so whether that's the council, again, setting that purpose and policy direction, then you have committees that are oversight and reviewing the things that the policy has been set. Now we want a committee to make sure that the policy is being enacted in the proper fashion. You have the finance department that has to report and get reports from the people that are investing these assets to make sure that the progress is being done in the proper fashion. You have a trustee established for administration and distributions. These things can get very complex over a longer period of time. You want to have a trustee that understands that complexity and can deliver those distributions in the proper fashion that you've set up for your outcome-based approach. And then lastly, you have an advisor like IndiWealth who sets the investment strategy. Again, you can use different structures. There are ways. Our structure that we think is the best aligned is that time weighted horizon, that time horizon based strategy that allows you to set the investment policy based upon the cohorts of ages that you're investing for. I think that can be the achievable structure that helps you get that through leadership changes, through market cycles, and through beneficiary needs. I think the strong governance and all of these institutions and entities working together really gets you to that focused outcome that you're trying to achieve for your miners trust. So how do we turn this strategy into action? And we'll talk about this more in detail down the road, but this is really kind of how you start the process. Really, again, we've thought about planning, we want to do this, we thought we have money set aside. How do we kind of go? Well, start by defining your outcomes. What should the trust support? And we'll go into this in the next video with regard to some of the outcome-based things that that tribal nations are trying to accomplish. Set up that distribution design. Okay, I have the outcomes. How do we distribute in the proper fashion to achieve those outcomes? Is it lump sum? Is it time frame weighted? Is it milestone based? There are different outcomes that you can do that show how and when the assets are paid and what milestones have to be achieved in order to receive that distribution. Then once you have the process and you have the distribution strategy and you have the cohorts that you have available, now you can align your investment strategy. Make sure your assets match the timing. That's what investment strategy should do the best for you from an approach of the miners' trusts, especially, is that, again, a person who is 18, who is 6 months from receiving their distribution, should have a very different investment profile than somebody who is 1 year old and who has 20 plus years before they receive their distributions. So again, it aligns with the distribution strategy. Sometimes 18 can take a little bit more risk if you're aligning those as saying, hey, we're going to do one at 18, one at 21, one at 25, whatever that may be. If you're doing age-based or milestone-based, you may still have some extended time, but understand your time, and that's how you achieve the best investment strategy going forward. Clarify your governance. I said it on the last slide, but there's going to be a lot of different entities doing things that are making sure the miners' trust is going in the right direction. But you need to decide who reviews, who decides things, and who communicates that to the broader constituent base so that you can all understand and the tribe as a whole can understand what you're trying to accomplish for the miners' trust. And lastly, once you have all of that set up, now it's communicate and review, set expectations and track your progress. Make sure that what you've set forth is still doing what you want to do as a nation. So I think once a year review, taking that step back and saying, are we still aligned with what we think are the most important values for our nation and most important values for our children so that they can achieve what we think is prosperous going forward? Is that still aligned with what we're doing in the miners' trust at this point right now, or do we need to change policy? I don't think that needs to be done very frequently, but once in a while, again, I think annually, at least a step back to understanding that. The interim, is tracking the progress, making sure you're still on track with what you've said you wanted to accomplish. And really, that can be done very, very quickly through proper reporting and proper alignment and the proper people seeing the proper things. It doesn't have to be a very aggressive, but you want to make sure that you have something that is at least tracking your progress towards your goals. Again, I always think a progress report that just tells you what you did against the market and all this other stuff, that's helpful, but not terribly. What you really want to know is, am I still on track with what I've set forth? And that's what an investment advisor such as IndiWealth can help you out with, and saying, here is how you performed, and here is where we are relative to plan, and here's what we may want to think about adjusting going forward. That's what an investment advisor's biggest value is, not telling you that you outperformed or underperformed the market by 1 or 2%. Lastly, in my opinion, again, turning strategy into action should be just around clearing up the purpose, understanding purpose, having a clear policy, clear roles, and regular review. If you can do that going forward, then you're probably going to be set up in a fashion that will achieve those outcomes in the best way that you all as a nation see as, the design and structure and the best way to achieve more sovereignty for your nation going forward. So if this was interesting to you, again, we're going to do a 4-part series on this, but really wanted to at least establish kind of the broad outset. The next videos will go a little bit more into detail on distribution, on governance, those kinds of things, and then on investment strategy as well. But if you want to understand more about this, we do have our Miners Trust Strategy and Stewardship Guide. It is on our website, and I will have a copy of the link to our resources page at IndiWealth, where you can download a copy of our Strategy and Stewardship Guide for your review. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope this was helpful. Again, we'll have more videos coming on this policy and distribution strategy and governance going forward. But until then, thank you very much and take care of yourself.